Well, hello everybody. I'm Joel Williams. This is Chase Elleby. We are the partners here at Williams Elleby, and today we want to answer a question for you that we get all the time, and that is, how much compensation should I expect to receive for my personal injury case? So I'll just go ahead and tell you, there ain't no clear answer for it.
Right.
There's a lot of different formulas that are involved. We would love to be able to come to you and say, hey, if X, Y, and Z happens to you, you're going to get X amount of dollars. If that's the answer you're looking for, you might need to look at a different video, because that's not what you're going to get here. But we are going to go through several different elements that you should consider when trying to come up with a fair amount for compensation for your particular injury case. So why don't you get us started off, Chase?
Right, for sure. So I'll say the first thing that I would kind of clear up is the only answer to the question is it depends, right? Which is like the answer to all the questions that the lawyers have to say. But the first thing we look at is the nature and extent of your injuries, right? So if you have bad injuries, broken bones, extended hospital stays, you can anticipate more compensation for those injuries. If it's soft tissue, maybe go to the chiropractor, 3-4 times or 3-4 weeks, less injuries, less compensation. So that's the first thing we look at.
Yeah. So in other words, you don't want a lot of compensation, because if you get a lot of compensation, you are jacked up.
That's exactly right. You see the billboards like, I got $500,000, I got $1 million. Well, you got that because you were very, very severely injured.
The funny ones to me are like $3 million for a neck injury.
Right.
I'm like, well, what's that mean? Is it like a sore neck, or a hyperextended neck, or a broken neck, or somebody's a quadriplegic? Because there's a big difference.
Right. Or 4 surgeries,
That's right.
Yeah.
All right, so number 2 is your medical bills, past and future. So you always have to take into account those medical bills. In some states, you can only recover your out-of-pocket expenses for medical bills. In other states, like Georgia, you can recover the gross amount of your medical bills. So if the hospital bills you $10,000 and you only had to pay $4,000 out of that, in Georgia, you can still claim the 10. In other states, you can only claim the 4. So it's very state specific, but you should take into account the amount of your medical bills, past and future, as well as how much do you have to pay back, if anything, out of any settlement or recovery that you get.
Right. Yeah, like liens and things like that are what you typically look for and what you have to pay back.
Yeah.
So another factor we look to is any loss of income, right? So if you have to miss work, if you're a W-2 employee, and let's say you missed 6 months of work, it's easy for us to get the W-2 or the pay stubs to calculate what your lost wages are. If you're a business owner, it's a little more difficult. We've got to get, profit and loss statements, kind of past earnings, and sort of come up with a formula to have a number on the lost wages. But that's another item that we look at for potential compensation from an injury.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd say number 4 would be pain and suffering. And that is probably the question we get more often than not. We just got this recently on a different video, the same question, but like, how much can I get for pain and suffering? And I'm just going to tell you, there is no specific formula that says, if you have this injury, or if you suffer this long, or if you suffer this badly, you get a certain amount of money. This is a situation where you really probably benefit the most from hiring a personal injury attorney. And I'm not saying just hire us, hire somebody that's credible and experienced and knows what they're doing, because they can take your specific scenario and then factor into account things like, how badly are you hurt? How badly did you suffer? How long did you suffer? How does this impact your day-to-day life at work, in recreational activities, in the community? All of these things, how long will you suffer into the future? And experienced attorneys are able to convey those things to a jury, or convey those things to an insurance adjuster, and then tailor a suggested formula to them for how much you should be awarded. So for example, things that we've used in the past would be, a newspaper article. We talk to a jury and we say, okay, well, Chase has a broken leg. He's got a rod in his leg. He's got pins in his leg. He's got a 20% permanent partial disability. He doesn't really, but I'm making this up. But if this came out in the Marietta Daily Journal, or whatever newspaper where it comes out in the county that we're in, as a job posting, and it said, for $1 million, this is what you have to go through, would you accept that job? Or would Chase accept that job? Or sometimes we try to extend it out into the future. Like, I've seen some attorneys say a penny per second for the rest of the time that the person is expected to suffer, or $1 per minute, or minimum wage per hour, or anything like that, there's so many different ways that you can try to tie a monetary amount to an intangible thing such as pain and suffering, and extrapolate what you suggest the adjuster or the jury should award.
Right, and I know we've talked about it in other videos, but what the definition of pain and suffering is whatever the enlightened conscience of a jury decides that amount is, which was Joel's example of how you can convey that to the jury to have them come up with a number that they're going to award the injured client. So, all right, another thing that I get asked about a lot is property damage. It's like in a car wreck, for instance, obviously you have your injuries and you have the property damage. Well, in Georgia, you have two claims, and this is probably the same in most all states, but you have your bodily injury claim and then your property damage claim. And you can always resolve your property damage claim before you resolve your bodily injury claim, and it won't have any impact on your bodily injury claim. Clients will call me all the time and say, hey, I just got a check for $5,000 to total out my car. Can I accept this? Is this going to have any impact on my bodily injury claim? And the answer is no, it's not. Now, of course, you don't want to sign any release or anything like that, but it's a separate claim from your bodily injury claim, but you also can and should get compensated for the property damage.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I don't know that insurance companies understand or realize just how often when they treat somebody badly on the property damage front, it forces them or makes them want to go hire an attorney where they otherwise wouldn't have. So if you're an insurance adjuster, treat people right for the property damage, and they may not even call us for the bodily injury claim.
Yeah.
But you try to stiff somebody on their property damage, then they're certainly going to call us. And lots of times, first question is, I've been trying to get a fair amount for my car, and they won't pay me, so now I don't trust them on my bodily injury portion, so I need you guys.
Right, exactly.
Another thing that can affect the amount of compensation you can expect to receive is what we call comparative negligence or contributory negligence. That's just simply a legal term that talks about your own negligence may reduce the amount that you're able to recover. So if you're in a car wreck that's partially your fault, or if you're in a slip and fall and part of the event was your fault, but it's also the store's fault or the other driver's fault, if you're assigned a percentage of fault, depending on what state you're in, it can reduce the total amount that you're able to recover. So for example, in Georgia, if you are awarded $100 and you're 20% at fault and the other person is 80% at fault, you'll recover $80 because your ultimate recovery will be reduced by your percentage of fault.
Yeah. Another thing I think is probably one of the most important is how much insurance is actually available. I mean, I can sit here and tell you stories for days where we've had wrongful death cases with only $25,000 of coverage, and relatively minor soft tissue damage cases with $50,000 or $50 million worth of coverage rather. So finding out how much insurance there is also, well, one, it's very important, and two, it's going to dictate what your potential recovery could be. Now, if there's a $100,000 policy, that doesn't mean the insurance company is going to pay you $100,000. That just means how much coverage that there is available to you to treat your injuries, which becomes important if, let's say, you have to have a surgery and you don't have health insurance. Well, how are you going to pay for that surgery? You might not be able to pay for that surgery through a settlement, but the settlement might be enough to have you go and actually, get health insurance to pay for that surgery. So it's very important to find out how much coverage there is, and how much coverage there is going to dictate how much compensation you'll receive from that injury.
Yeah, and that begs the question. I've gotten both of these before. Well, why can't we go after the at-fault person's personal assets?
Right.
And two, well, am I just completely screwed if there's not enough insurance?
Right.
I'll answer the first one, you answer the second one.
Okay.
So the answer to the first one is you can certainly go after the at-fault person's personal assets, but the reality of the real world is that most people who have minimum limits coverage don't have a lot of personal assets to protect.
Right.
The people that have $1 million sitting in the bank are the people that are normally going to have the $1 million policies. There are exceptions to that. Some people are not very smart and they may have $5 million in the bank and only have a minimum limits policy, but that's very rare. I think you handled one of those when you were a defense lawyer and somebody had to pay their own money. But most of the time, your recovery is going to be limited by the amount of insurance that's available.
Yeah.
So is somebody completely screwed if there's not enough insurance?
Well, the classic lawyer answer is it depends, but most of the time, yes, unfortunately. So obviously, we look first to see how much liability coverage there is, right? If there's not enough liability coverage, then we look to see how much uninsured motorist coverage there is. And this is in a typical car wreck case. And there's certain areas we look for potential uninsured motorists, and then we get a full picture of how much coverage is available. Now, again, I can go back to my example where there's only $25,000 of total coverage, and let's say you've got a $200,000 hospital bill. Well, that's clearly not enough coverage. Mm-hmm. Where you could, I don't want to say luck out, but could be, I guess, in a better situation is if we send a demand letter to the insurance company and we give the insurance company 30 days to pay the policy limits because this is an easy case, you better pay, my client's injured, and for whatever reason the insurance company doesn't do that, then we could potentially go after the insurance company for bad faith, and that is a situation where they possibly pay above the policy limits to the full extent of the damages. But that doesn't happen that often. I know we've done a video on that as well, so check that video out for a more detailed explanation. But generally, you are in a bad spot, but that's not always the case.
Yeah, and one way that you can protect yourself from being in that bad spot is make sure that you are proactive in protecting yourself. And when you go to purchase your own automobile policy, purchase enough uninsured motorist coverage or coverage or underinsured motorist coverage to protect yourself.
And make sure it's add-on or excess coverage.
Yeah, exactly. And so the question is, what is enough? Well, what is enough is what you can afford. So it really, you need to shop it around to different companies and figure out what you can afford to pay to protect yourself.
Yeah.
Because if you go cheap on coverage, you may find yourself in that position where there's just not enough to recover from. Yeah. Lastly, how much compensation you can expect to receive is, believe it or not, affected by whether you have a lawyer and whether that lawyer is worth his or her salt. So you need to find somebody who's experienced, preferably not somebody who photoshops their head onto a beach body, onto a billboard all over the interstate, because that's just silly. I don't know how anybody can take that seriously. But anyway, find a lawyer that knows what he or she is doing, who's experienced in your state, who is preferably local to the county where you are at because they know how the court system works in that particular county, and that specializes in personal injury law. So you don't want to hire a bankruptcy attorney to handle your personal injury case. You don't want to handle a personal injury lawyer to handle a criminal case. There are very few lawyers nowadays that do all of it, and there's even fewer lawyers that do all of it well.
Yeah.
Most people specialize. So, and to sum it all up, for how much compensation can you expect to receive for your personal injury case is the nature and extent of your injuries, medical expenses, past and future, loss of income, pain and suffering, property damage, comparative fault, insurance or coverage, and do you have a lawyer involved?
Thanks, guys. We appreciate you watching this video. We would ask that you please like, subscribe, and if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the section below, and we will see y'all next week.